In this last video in this unit, we'll talk about the steps in developing a trademark and particularly how the iGEM teams have done that. So again, when you decide on your potential product, one of the first things that's necessary is to research the competitors. While the wet lab is looking at the potential, the possibility of developing this scientifically, the human practices group needs to look at what's the potential market? Who are the competitors? Who would buy this type of product? Because the name may be different if you're targeting youth versus senior citizens, because they have different expectations for names. So at the very beginning, brainstorm lots of ideas. Get down as many ideas as possible, and then sort them into categories. And within each category, pick one name or two names that you think are the best. And then compare the different categories and talk to other people to see what their ideas are about these things. Remember, the things that we want to look at are, does it cause confusion? Is there any other product with a similar name? Is it deceptive? Would there be anything that people would look at and get a wrong idea about this? Is it descriptive? It can be suggestive, but not descriptive. And again, some of the iGEM names that have been suggested, you'll see examples of all of these different problems. And then, does it sound good? Does it sound good to the consumers? What's the association that other people outside your group are going to draw with this name? Because they don't know about synthetic biology and all those terms that you like to use. So you need to run your name by other people outside of your team to get their opinion. Think, or ask them, what do you think of when you hear this name? So let me give some examples from the different iGEM teams. The team the second year used Ligreen as a name. And this was actually a very good name because it's they use it as the lining for a paper cup to make it waterproof. Because paper by itself is made of cellulose, which is part of wood, but it absorbs water. On the other hand, wood also contains lignin. That's the thing that makes wood stiff, but it also makes it waterproof. And so by lining your paper cup with lignin, it makes it waterproof without having to add a layer of plastic. And this is green, it's environmentally friendly because your paper cup then has no plastic, it's only basically wood and therefore totally recyclable very easily. So Lig plus green conveyed this lignin and green, or ecologically, environmentally friendly, very, very clearly. Very good name. The third iGEM team named their product ASFAST, African Swine Flu Autonomous Screening Test. And this came from African swine flu, ASF, and FAST. The idea that this was it was suggestive of the main advantage that their product had over other tests for swine flu. Now, they looked at several other names before deciding on this, including Determination, but that's not specific. It's descriptive, but it's not specific to their product. Virus Executor. Well, it wasn't really an executor. Execution is to kill something. And they didn't kill the virus, they simply detected it. So that was somewhat deceptive. And then Swine Dector. I'm not sure what dector was supposed to be, whether it was supposed to be doctor or detector or what. But again, it didn't detect swine, it detected swine flu. And therefore wasn't very clear as to what they were trying to do. So in their final determination, they came down to two possible pairs. One was Criswine or Crispig, and the other was Asset or ASFAST. The first two referred to CRISPR, which is a technology used in synthetic biology. But society in general doesn't know about CRISPR. And so if you say Criswine, number one, is that swine or wine? And what is Chris? It's very unclear. Or Chris Pig, it sounds like you're getting a crispy pig. Maybe it's barbecued, I don't know. But it doesn't have the right kind of association. Asset, again, it doesn't convey anything about the test or about swine flu. So ASFAST turned out to be the best name, combining ASF with the idea of fast being then a suggestive name. Now what about the fourth team? The fourth team wanted to detect dengue, the dengue virus. And so initially their name was Dengue Grenade. Their goal originally was, number one, to detect the virus, and number two, to try to prevent it by injecting these proteins that they were going to develop into people in order to compete for the binding site and therefore prevent disease. But as we talked about this, one of the things that I pointed out is that you can't possibly do that in 1 year, because the second goal would involve human testing. Anytime you're going to inject somebody into people, it's a very extensive process that requires many stages of testing, including extensive animal testing, human testing for negative reactions, including allergies, specificity, interaction with other body systems, dosage, which is based on the titer of the virus, characteristics of the individual, age, sex, etc. So anything that involves human testing would never be approved by the IGEM committee and could not possibly be completed within a year. So they had to limit their design to detecting the virus rather than treating. And therefore you couldn't call it dengue grenade with the idea of destroying or confusing the virus, because that would be deceptive, because it doesn't convey what the product is trying to do, and it would be misleading. So I suggested another name, Denditex, and this is an inventive spelling for dengue detects. So it's a detection of the dengue virus. It's suggestive, and this was what the team finally adopted. Now, the fifth IGEM team was trying to develop a product that would treat MRSA. MRSA is called a superbug. It's a multiple resistant strain of bacteria. And so initially they were thinking about superdebuggerus. Okay, that's definitely trademarkable, but it sounds sort of cute. It doesn't sound very scientific. It sounds more childish. And then they came up with Mr. SA for Mr. Super Assassin. And I suggested that instead of Super Assassin, they could call it Super Bug Assassin, because MRSA, again, is commonly known as a superbug. And that was what they accepted. But as you think about how to spell that as a trademark, they chose MR period SA, Mr. SA. But some people might look at that and say, oh, is that MRSA or Mr. Sa, or how would you say that? So should you instead say MR period S period A period, or Mr. S period A period, or just MRSA with Mr. SA without any periods? What would be the best way to develop this trademark from this idea, this oral Mr. SA? And perhaps it would be best to look at or ask different people how they would read this to see if they would read it the way that you want them to read it. And then the final team, the IGEM 6 team, suggested 3 possible names for their product. The first one, the one that they really liked, was EPIC, EPIC, Engineering PKS System in E. coli for CVD, where the I was from the end of E. coli. that's a problem. Another problem is PKS system. No one knows that outside of synthetic biology. And so this has no suggestive value. Furthermore, I looked online and I found there are 134 other cases of organizations, groups, whatever, that use this abbreviation EPIC, and therefore it would be epically hard to trademark. The second suggestion that they had was E. corazon, where the E was from E. coli and corazon from heart, because they were developing a product, an omega fatty acid, to protect the heart from disease. But again, don't get stuck on E. coli or PKS or these other things that have no meaning to the public. Yes, they may be the way that you develop the product, but they have no suggestive meaning. And more important in this case, E. coli, because the E period, the period on the keyboard is right below L. Spanish would say el corazon to, because they always put a the, el or la, with a noun. And so they said, is that just a misspelling of el corazon? And so it would be very confusing to anybody that spoke Spanish. And then the third possibility that they came up with was ecomega, from eco, like ecosystem, and omega. And I said, yeah, that sounds pretty good. Maybe instead of ecosystem, you could think about eco-friendly or ecologically friendly, because that was descriptive but suggestive of their product. And then finally, they decided on PAC-Omega. And their initial reason for choosing this was PFA plus ACC plus cerulenin produces omega. Again, the public has no knowledge of what PFA, ACC, or cerulenin are. So that makes no sense to the public. But then they said, oh, well, then we thought maybe it could be considered prominent or promising or pure artery care, omega. And I said, yeah, okay, pure artery care, because particularly one of the selling points for your product is that it's pure, that it doesn't have any of the contaminants that other fish oil would have. And so that was the name that they finally settled on. So in conclusion, don't get carried away with trying to combine two words, because it's very difficult. You need to attempt to be suggestive, but it really requires native intuition to know how someone would see this and whether they could guess it from what you have there. And so you need to check with other people. If it's not guessable, if there's no suggestive value, then it becomes fanciful. And then you need to consider all these other linguistic factors, like the sound of the letters or the associations that it might have in other languages. And so that becomes even more difficult. So suggestive names are generally a good idea for the iGEM teams. And hopefully this unit will help you in determining what names might be feasible for your product.